Thank you. Okay, first question for the audience. Who has been to the last panel? Oh, that's good. Perfect. So now we can start all over again. No, just kidding. So the last panel was about making the invisible visible. And now we are talking, basically, that was journalism. So we are now stepping into a specific part of journalism, which is VR and crisis regions. The possibilities, limits, do's and don'ts. To shortly introduce myself, my name is Kathleen Schröter from the Fraunhofer Heinrich Institute here in Berlin, and I'm running the Innovation Center for Immersive Imaging Technologies, and that's, I guess, why they asked me to moderate that, because I have a bit of background in virtual reality and technology, and I'm really happy that they invited me, and I think that was the idea of in VR. So I will introduce our speakers so that you understand why are they here and what is their background and why it is specific that we choose those panelists together. So, but I want to point out the last panel. It was about journalism, but they said we are not talking about empathy. This panel is definitely talking about empathy, and I want to point out what does it mean. And empathy, it's basically the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within his or her frame of reference. And our panel, everybody on this panel basically knows how to put you in someone else's shoes. So we want to talk about this in the next 30 or 25 minutes, I heard, that why we think that 360 video and virtual reality is exactly the right tool to raise empathy and so forth. So let me introduce you to Christiane, Gayatri and Philipp. First Christiane, Christiane's background, Christiane Wittenbecher, next to ISIS terrorists in Iraq, at the front line in eastern Ukraine, on both sides of the Middle East conflict, or inside the biggest refugee camps in the world. Christiane is passionate about being a reporter, and I think that is a very unique part to be in, and I'm really happy and surprised that females are working in this area and that you really pick this part. We will come back later to the question why. Her stories have brought her to Bangladesh, to Thailand and Singapore. One of her latest projects is basically in Bangladesh. I hope we have some time to talk about that. But she has a background in journalism, and she has the experience for TV and web video editing for Axel Springer, ARD and Spiegel Online. Apart from the crisis regions, I want to point out this one project that you have received a Deutsche Reporterpreis. That was about a Stasi prisoner, which is basically really important for this city we are in right now. So this is a bit about Christiane. Then we have Gayatri Parameswaran. She's also with a background in journalism. She is a VR creator and co-founder of Now Here Media. She started her career when she was 22 and basically as a conflict reporter focusing on human rights. So she covered conflicts from the Maoist central India, Kashmir, Syria, Iraq. She basically covered or documented the underreported issues in over 25 countries. So her background also in journalism brought her then to virtual experiences, and there was one part that she co-directed, which is This Is Love, which is a VR experience about intimate partner violence, which was screened at the UN Global Voice Film Festival in San Francisco, and she got a Social Impact Media Award nomination for that. One of the VR experiences that she's working on right now is a room-scaled experience, and that is different to 360 video. We will talk about that. It's called Walk With Me, and that is dedicated to the risks of explosives in Iraq. Tough. Last but not least, we have Philipp Wenning. He is part of InVR. He has a background in the traditional filmmaking. He works since over 15 years in filmmaking, cinema, TV, directing, editing. And Philipp, I know quite well since years because I have been there when his project, the Imagonaut, which is a 180-degree narrative, was world premiered at the Berlinale, and it was in our time lab, which is a 180-degree screening at Fraunhofer. So together with Christian Möller and Sönke Kirchhoff, who is also here, he co-founded InVR, and this is basically a full-service production studio for virtual reality and 360 video. And when it comes to crisis regions, you have been working on 2 projects, which one is the 360 video in the refugee camp in Uganda. That focused on the minor children, interviews with children, parents, and health workers, showing basically the reality of a refugee camp hospital. And a second experience they worked on with for UNICEF was a Syrian refugee camp experience where you, that is in South Turkey, where you basically follow a little girl and her siblings through a day of their lives in a refugee camp. That's, yes. A lot of people talk about virtual reality as a gimmick. Now, after the introduction, you kind of understand, nah, it's not only a gimmick, and we can use it in different ways. I want to, with your background, I want to focus a bit on a short. Philipp, I pointed out 2 projects, but it is a full-service virtual reality 360 company you're working on with. Can you say, like, in comparison to any other projects, because I know you do commercials, you do just entertainment, in comparison to that, I'm pretty sure you see a lot of limitations or maybe more possibilities when we talk about the genre of journalism or in specific crisis regions. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure.
Just the comparison.
This is weird. Okay. So I think, like, you would see these projects that you mentioned somehow like documentary films. So you basically you have a protagonist or you have a basic story, and then you go in the field and you try to find your images for that. When you shoot a commercial, of course, you have everything planned out, and like that's a major difference, pretty obvious. I mean, from a creator's point of view, of course, it's a very different approach. I mean, if you work for a brand or if you do something for entertainment, it's very light. Maybe it doesn't really touch you at all. And when you go into a refugee camp and you're confronted with all these destinies and all these people, it won't not touch you, of course. I mean, that's a huge difference. Does that go into the direction? Because I mean, it's a very
yes. But like the possibilities of storytelling in that point. Like you said, for everything else, it is all there's already a story. The client knows what they want to see. With this project, like with UNICEF, what are they approaching you with? What are they saying that has to be the story?
Yeah, but to be honest, on this level, there's not so much difference because I mean, they also want to have a product in the end. They want to use it. They use it to collect donations. So it is somehow also like a commercial. I mean, it has a sense like this. And also, I mean, like from my kind of naive approach, I wanted to not only show the crisis, but I also wanted to show some positive sides. And they let me film it, but it never will end up in the film because their theory, and they base it on numbers, basically is that people do donate when they see the crisis and not when they see the solution. So that's a bit weird, you know, because I didn't want to do these classical crisis images, and it's very hard to get that through even these NGOs that are very open-minded and stuff like this.
You have experience with other documentaries or journalism in 360 video, right?
Sure.
So there is the only difference is definitely the crisis itself.
In a way, I mean, I've never been to a crisis region without shooting VR, so I cannot say what's different.
And that's especially a good question for the other two, because Gayatri and Christiane, you have both background in classic journalism, in let's say 2D video journalism. there was a point where you said, okay, I am now stepping into VR or 360 video. Can you tell us about the point? The question is for both of you. And what is the difference? What is the main difference? Because everything you did before was also dedicated to crisis regions or political issues.
Christiane, do you want to go first?
Yeah. The point when I was started diving into VR and figuring out how we can use this technology for storytelling and bringing our stories that we want to tell as journalists to the people was 2 years ago, more or less, when I was quitting my old job at Axel Springer. And at the same time, my colleague Martin Heller was founding Into VR. So I started working as a freelancer, and then my first story I did was also in a refugee camp in Hungary. In Serbia, on the border to Hungary. So the situation was like this. I was trying to sell or to pitch this story, and I was thinking about Spiegel Online or Zeit Online, the companies I was working for as a freelancer at the time. And then I said, okay, wait a minute. Why shouldn't we do it like a 360 video? And this was the first time. And after that, I was so addicted to it because you could see immediately that these kind of stories need to be told differently. Mm-hmm. In 360, we shift from storytelling to story living, because it's not more about only shooting nice images and letting people tell the story. It's about creating experiences. Mm-hmm. It's about bringing people to other places they could never access, maybe. It's about telepresence, really being immersed in a different situation. But it's not done with just placing the camera somewhere in a crisis region or in a refugee camp. We have to focus on stories and on people and their motivation. And this new media allows us to tell the stories differently, because you really get closer to this kind of people. Mm-hmm. When you are in Iraq and you see the soldier, the Peshmerga soldier, in his home, and you see him on the checkpoint, you see him explaining what is his motivation, and why did he buy a gun and voluntarily fighting against ISIS. I want to see that, and I want to be at his home. I want to look around. I want to see even the mundane, trivial details which are maybe not important for the story, but they are. Because when you are at his home and you see all those details tell something about this person as well.
Mm-hmm. As if you would be there.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to another point here, but Gayatri?
Yeah, I think that I just want to echo what Christiane just said, is that it is this feeling of presence. I mean, we are now currently working on a room scale experience from Fallujah, and we recreated using photogrammetry about 200 square meters of someone's home.
So does everybody know what photogrammetry is?
I'll just explain quickly. So basically what happens with photogrammetry is that you use a photo as a measure or as a single unit in recreating a certain space. So if you had to recreate this stage 9, you would take perhaps 200 to 400 to 500 pictures of this space and then put it in a software, and then you can recreate this entire space, and then in the VR headset you can walk through the chairs and back. Yeah. So we are doing that in this experience, and that is, I think for me, that's when we've tested it with some people, this whole idea of presence, it's taking it to the next level, where you can, as Christiane and Philipp just said, we are storytellers, we are journalists and filmmakers, and we have the opportunity to go to these places, meet these people, and tell their stories. And most of our audiences don't. So with 360 and VR, we are actually also allowing them to go to these places and meet these people and hear their stories. And I think that is really perhaps the biggest possibility. The biggest limitation is war porn, like crisis porn, showing people just, what's wrong with the region or what's wrong with the politics of it, the crisis of it. I think that is the biggest fear I always have going into a crisis region, being very wary that you're not exploiting someone else's suffering or someone else's problems and it's a very difficult situation to be in, and involves a lot of difficult decisions in the process. So I think those would be the differences or the limitations and the possibilities that I see in VR.
You just mentioned the photogrammetry. Christiane, did you also work with other technologies other than 360 video?
Well, mostly we do 360 video. We also work on VR concepts, but most of our clients, especially for media companies, 360 is very attractive because with 360 you could also bring the content to the audience on a much lower level because you don't necessarily need the headset. You can also use an app, YouTube, Magic Window, your smartphone. We can use social media like Facebook and YouTube. So for media companies, it's really interesting. It's like we say sometimes it's like a bridge to VR because it's like really easy to learn this kind of technology. It's not it's not really complex. It's not more complicated than shooting with a regular DSLR camera, and it's also much cheaper. And we can work as VJs like we used to be before. Basically, our concept is like working like a VRJ. So everyone in our team is able to pitch the story, do the research, do the shooting, the editing, the post-production, the headline and everything. So we can be really quick and flexible, and we are really independent when we are in the field. So every time we go in the field, we are alone.
Okay, you said you just started 2 years ago. When I point this question now to Philipp, I know a lot about the technology behind it. When she's saying everybody can edit in their company, you know a lot about stitching artifacts and so forth. So it sounds like Christiane doesn't have any issues with that. Are we at that point that we don't have issues with that anymore, or just is the audience like, okay, well, whatever?
I think there will always be this kind of issue. I think it really depends on your story. I mean, if your story is strong enough, these stitching artifacts don't matter so much, you know. And I guess that's what you're pointing at as well. It became a consumer technology. That's how it is. I mean, the cameras are really small. They are affordable now. The software is out there. So we're maybe in a time of camcorder when it comes to VR cameras. But then there's always the difference between a camcorder home video and a high-end Hollywood film, you know. And that's the same in VR. I mean, there's like different levels of quality, but in the end, the story is the most important. So it doesn't really matter.
Always.
I mean, of course, but if it's too trashy, let's say, the quality, the story will also not be transported. So it's not something that you can only focus on that, you know. Oh
yeah, I have seen really bad stuff also.
Can I add something?
Yeah,
to
of
this?
course. Sure.
I totally would like to echo you, because I think it's not the technology or the camera the type you use that makes a difference. It's the way how we tell the stories, and if we can manage to approach these people in this hostile environments, in refugee camp, in places of war and crisis. So it needs to have journalists in the field, not just camera operators, because I mean, you can use a shitty camera, you can use a quality camera, but if you're not able to create an experience with all your experience as a journalist, then that's not worth it. Because if somebody is not really into your story, then the technology itself won't make it.
Yeah, totally agree. As this is the special panel about crisis regions, and we have two female here. I have to really point that out because Gayatri, you have been in countries where let's say you blend in more than Christiane does. You are a local in India, so they won't think that you are a journalist. In comparison with Christiane, I guess they would think maybe either she is a stupid tourist who's going into crisis regions, or she must be a journalist.
Or a stupid journalist.
Yeah, or it could be a stupid journalist. Yeah.
Can you tell us something from both of you about the special issue documenting crisis regions as a female?
So I think there are, again, I guess there are a lot of areas that you cannot go to if you're a woman. Yeah, but that also means that there are a lot of areas you can go to as a woman. So into homes is much easier as a woman.
Oh, there's a possibility.
Yes, and there are really a lot of possibilities. I know a lot of women who do end up going to, myself included, I am looking to speak to women. And that's more possible because I'm a woman. I always work, I don't know, as a safety measure, because we are talking about crisis regions. When we hire local teams, in the last 3 to 4 cases, our local producers have been women. And that makes it easier to access. I don't know, you have a lot of men on the team anyway. So if you have, even if it's not a similar number of women, if you have a certain number of women, it makes it more accessible, it makes it more equal, and it makes it more possible to get a whole picture. And otherwise there is a huge risk of, in journalism, that's a really big risk, that if you send out, and it's a gross generalization, of course, that they say that if you send out men, what you get are men with guns. And if you send out women, you might get another side of the story. So I do think that it's important, and I'm not saying that men are not allowed to do certain things or not. I think there is a certain access that you get by being who you are. And I guess you can do the best with it, or you can blow it up. So it depends on your approach.
Christiane?
Yeah, I totally agree. I never had the feeling that being a woman keeps me from telling my stories. Actually, I always felt it kind of helps. Because especially
with ISIS in Iraq.
Yeah, even there. Because first of all, when I do 360 shooting in crisis regions, it's not about placing the camera in the middle of the battlefield. It's more about telling the story around. I want to see what kind of people are living there, what are their motivations. And this sometimes helps, especially with women from who are escaped from Mosul recently, and you talk to them, and then they open up easier if you're a woman. And even I was shooting in the Peshmerga camp, like on a military basis, and I had the chance to really get inside. So it was actually really funny. There was a general I wanted to interview, and he was so idle. Like
egoistic,
really, really confident, and actually he didn't answer any of my questions. He only talked about heroic stories of his past. But this helped to get access to them. And then there was the situation when they said, like, okay, we have ISIS terrorists, suspects. We are going to captivate them and interrogate them, so you can come with us now or never. Like, take it or leave it. So we had the chance to actually join them and be there. And okay, I was the only woman there, but I don't know. I didn't feel like they don't want me to have to be there just because I'm a woman.
Okay, then I have a question for all of you regarding the time. It's like Tom is saying, okay, 1 minute. All of you, yes or no? Are you telling your parents that you're going before you go?
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. I remember when my first assignment was in Burma, and I had to be an undercover Myanmar. I had to be an undercover reporter.
You were 22.
Yes, I was 22, and you can imagine my dad is an Indian dad who was in a really difficult situation, and I told him, these are the emergency contacts. Do not contact anyone unless you don't hear from me for 2 weeks. And the next day, he was calling all the numbers on there. Finding out, where's my daughter?
2 weeks.
Yeah. So since then, I've been a little bit more cautious with saying where I'm going, where I'm not going, how big the risk is, and how small the risk is.
Philipp?
I did tell my parents, yes. I also told them when I came back, so.
Yeah.
That's actually good. I see do we have one question from the audience? Because, can we erase this? That would be awesome.
Thank you very much for the talk. I did some reporting from Lesbos with a sort of body cam as well, a sort of GoPro attached to my body, not VR, but I got a lot of criticism for it because people said it was lacking the distance that you should have as a journalist towards the people you're depicting and the situation you're trying to show. With VR, that's even much, a much bigger question for you probably. How do you see that problem, or do you see it at all?
Yeah, I think that is a really relevant issue. And I do think that there are, I mean, everyone makes their own decision, I feel like, when it comes to knowing where to stop showing certain things, you know. For example, in one of our latest projects, we are dealing, our protagonist had a very tragic story of losing 2 sons to an explosion. We wanted to recreate that explosion, but we didn't, I mean, I made the decision to not make it graphic because that's not the point of the story, in one sense, that I don't want to make people sick and feel really disturbed and traumatized. So I didn't get a graphic designer to design that graphic. Instead, chose to just show a blank with an explosion and the sound. And I think every filmmaker, every creator at one point comes across this question when you're working, even whether you're using a body cam, whether you're using, you know, 2D or whatever medium, that you have to know for yourself and be very sure where your line is and be able to defend that line. Because you might make the decision tomorrow to say, okay, no, but I want to show that, and you have your reasons for that, and that should also be okay, right?
Yeah, I was in Lesbos too, and I also, I mean, this is a thing you're confronted with as a journalist all the time when you're in a situation like this. It's like, okay, everyone is helping here, everyone is saving lives, and what am I doing? I'm just standing around with my camera, you know, capturing everything. I'm the most useless person in the world right now in this situation. But this is, I mean, it helps to remember that we have a reason to be there. And we have a reason to tell the stories in VR. And I totally agree to you. We have to be much more responsible with what we show, because in 360 you are immersed. There's no way of escaping unless you throw away your glasses. So yeah, that's the issue, of course.
I just want to say I recommend any studies about virtual reality and embodiment, and talking with psychologists, because virtual reality, in comparison to any other medium, can really hurt you physically and traumatize you. So talking about horror stories in virtual reality, people do that, but there are studies that say don't do that, please. And that is also, that showing an explosion could be a horror and could be traumatizing. Yeah, so please read some stuff, do some homework.
And watch films in the VR cinema.
Yes, there's a VR cinema, and I thank our panelists, and sorry for running over time. Thank you for your attention.